I want the intellectual out there to realize that believing in God actually makes logical sense. There's things like the anthropic principle, the perfect fine-tuning of everything from cosmology to quantum physics and everything in between is so perfectly fine-tuned that if you just change just any little thing about the makeup of the universe, or even down to quantum physics, life couldn't exist.
Believers like to say that if any of the laws of physics were any different than they are, like if the force of gravity were even slightly stronger or weaker than it is, that the universe would be structurally so different that it wouldn't be able to support life. And they love to talk about how tight these constraints are, even though physicists like Sean Carroll, Lawrence Krauss, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and many others have explained that it's not as restrictive as creationists make it out to be, nor is it as significant an issue as they imagine. In fact, Sean Carroll said that all creationist arguments are bad, and this one is too, but in his opinion, this is the very best that believers can do. Even though asking the question of why reality is as it is does not in any way even imply the possibility of a mystical designer. So the very best they have still isn't good enough to even get started. I've already seen the fine-tuning argument debunked a few different ways, and I'll put links to some of those below, but I'm not going to repeat those other arguments. I have one of my own that I've never heard before from anyone else, and I think it works pretty well. First, there are two ways to look at this reality in which we find ourselves. If the values or parameters of physics were significantly different, then yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation because this would be a universe in which life does not exist. And you wonder, how could you have a universe in which life does not exist? But now remember that most of the worlds in this solar system or in this galaxy or in indeed the whole universe, most of the worlds have things going on there that no one has ever reported. No one of intelligence has ever seen. And look at the history of our own planet, for example. I mean, 4 billion years, unless you want to just deny all scientific evidence, which of course I know creationists are wont to do. But let's remember how many billions of sunsets we've had on this planet without any poets to reflect on what a beautiful scene that can be. So it's not impossible to have a universe in which there is no recognition of itself, in which there are no intelligent beings. And I don't have a problem with the concept that the universe in which we live just happens to have all the right parameters for life to exist, because the universe is obviously not fine-tuned for life, and we'll get into how we know that in a moment. Now, unfortunately, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had a wildly popular string of movies over the last couple decades, with a lot of fantasy nonsense in each film, which means that most people have been misled, and consequently they have no idea what mutations are, or how evolution works, or what a multiverse is. And I don't have time in this video to correct all of that. Suffice to say that string theorists have proposed that there is a main source for universes to emerge. And think of it as watching bubbles appear in the bottom of a saucepan coming to boil. Those bubbles seemingly appear out of nothing, but we know they're really not coming out of nothing, that they're just changing states from liquid to gas. And think of each bubble as a singularity in which four spatial dimensions or four spatial dimensions inflate three-dimensional space-time, which again might appear like something coming from nothing, like if a three-dimensional object goes through an MRI and appears to, seems to appear out of nothing, and then it builds and changes shape until it seemingly disappears again. But again, that's not something coming from nothing. It just looks like it is. And especially since every singularity has already existed since before the beginning of time, so that in every universe, there was never a time in which there was just nothing. And I don't care how you envision this. I'm not even saying that this is an analogy is correct. I'm just trying to give you an analogy, my favorite analogy, to help you understand what a multiverse is. Assuming for the moment that there is one, that there is a multiverse, then it is logically eternal, never created. And string theorists propose that it might have produced as many as 10 to the 500th power worth of universes. And all of them might have different parameters such that life exists only in a tiny fraction of them, that the few in which those parameters allow life to exist. Now, the main problem you might have with that is how inefficient that is. But even if the universe in which we live is the only one there is, it is grossly inefficient. And that is my, I think, unique argument against fine-tuning. If you want to pretend that there is an omnipotent, omniscient, infallible force that fine-tuned the universe for life, then it isn't just the laws of physics we have to think about, but biological reproduction as well. So let's look at how inefficient that is. I read that a human female is born with 4 million oocytes, cells that may become eggs. At least half of those are absorbed back into her body shortly after birth. That's a couple million that are lost right away. And she continues to lose around 10,000 or so of these every month until she reaches puberty, which is typically more than a decade later. So that by the time she can become pregnant, she only has about 10% of her potential fertility left. And she continues to lose another 1,000 or more oocytes every month. Because for every oocyte that becomes a mature egg, another 1,000 or so die. And what she actually ovulates represents only 1/10,000th of what she was born with. And out of those 400 or so mature eggs, how many of them get fertilized? Only about 1% at best. Although that's hard to estimate because as many as a quarter of all pregnancies end in miscarriage. With many of those happening so early in the process, the woman might never even know that she was pregnant. Now, how inefficient is all of that already? But as grotesquely wasteful as all of that already is, wait till we look at the male gametes, because guys, don't even pretend. Everybody knows that the majority of your emissions end up in a special sock or down the shower drain or in some other inappropriate place. In the tiny minority of instances where spermatozoa find their way into a suitable human host, they're often victims of cannibalism, or they might become a subject of proctology, depending on what traditions you observe when celebrating your birthday. So in the minority of instances, when you inseminate a suitable human host, and in the minority of those instances where they make it into the right orifice, one where they're not also blocked by a petroleum trampoline or some other application of birth control, then how fine-tuned for life are they? Well, statistically, couples trying to get pregnant have to engage at least 3 times a week for a whole year, and they still have a 10% failure rate after all that. But even in the minority of instances where pregnancy actually happens and also doesn't end in miscarriage, how inefficient is that? Because a man produces tens of millions of these tiny DNA torpedoes, and only one of them makes it to the mark. How inefficient is it to hit your target only once out of 70 million tries on average? It has been said that a hallmark of intelligent design is an efficient simplicity. But these circumstances are so absurdly, unnecessarily complex and indefensibly inefficient that they do not even permit an intelligent designer, certainly not one fine-tuning anything for life. Believers imagine the universe as if it was perfectly ordered with clockwork precision, whereas I see it as a boiling chaos, where the best we can hope for is the appearance of a temporary balance, and that it only looks serene because we're watching it in really slow motion. So slow that some of the more catastrophic aspects of cosmic chaos look as placid as a Bob Ross painting, in which there might be a happy little nebula here or there, not because a sun exploded there, but because the resultant clouds are colorful and pretty. And go ahead and ask why the universe in which we live happens to be the one in which we can live. And while you're at it, you could ask the same question about the Earth. Why is our world optimal for producing life? A better question would be, why is the entire rest of the cosmos that we can see so brutally hostile to life? Clearly, the universe was not fine-tuned for life because we would die instantly everywhere else and can only survive temporarily on a fraction of the skin of this one tiny mote of dust across a seemingly endless void of death. Believers say that if the Earth were even just a few miles closer to the sun, that we'd burn up like Venus, or if we were any further away, we'd freeze like Mars. But the parameters are not that restrictive, and the ellipse of our orbit is greater than that anyway. If the Earth were in Venus's orbit, it would be hotter. It would become a different climate than we have now, but it would never be a Venusian climate because these two worlds are chemically different. I've seen estimates and computer simulations implying that the Earth would still be inhabitable by some things. Not everything we have today would make it there. We would lose a lot of stuff, but some things could still adapt to the increasingly harsh conditions. And likewise, if the Earth were out where Mars is, we'd tip the scales the other way, but some things would still make it. Importantly, though, if you left the Earth where it is and put Mars where Venus is and Venus where Mars is, then you might think that all three planets would be more conducive to life, but the Earth would still be the only one to have life. Venus would still be uninhabitable even if it were way out where Mars is. It wouldn't be as hot as it is now, but it'd still be way too hot, hotter than needed to cook a pizza. And plus, the atmosphere would still be poisonous and the atmospheric pressure would still be crushing, like being at the bottom of the ocean. If Mars were the same size as the Earth and Venus, then it could hold a thicker atmosphere. As it is, if Mars were in the orbit of Venus, then the solar winds, being stronger, that much closer to the sun, would quickly strip Mars of what little atmosphere it still had left. And Mars also doesn't have a magnetosphere anymore, where it did have once upon a time. But then something happened that caused the planet to crack open, exploding 4 massive supervolcanoes, each bigger than anything on Earth, which for such a tiny world was too much heat loss to survive. The planet effectively bled to death. The core cooled and solidified. Thus, tectonic activity stopped, and the magnetosphere faded away as the planet effectively died. Without the dynamo of a molten interior, nor the gravitational force of a large satellite like our moon to cause tidal flexing, then there's no way to generate a magnetic field sufficient to protect from dangerous solar radiation. And you would need that for anything to live there. Otherwise, mutations would be so rampant that nothing would have a chance to evolve. Remember that when pioneer thinkers realized that the Earth was a sphere, just like the moon, they imagined that if there's people living here, there may be people living there. They thought the same thing about Martians and Venusians, too. That's one thing we should expect of a universe that is fine-tuned for life. It should be that, like all our favorite sci-fi shows, where practically every planet is like an island, where you step out of your ship without a spacesuit, without even a jacket, and not have to worry about atmospheric toxins or lethal radiation. And not all of these worlds would have intelligent life, but life would be common on most, if not all of them. I also imagine that if God were going to build, if I were a God and I was going to build a universe, fine-tuned for life, because that's what I would want. I would want a universe fine-tuned for life. And so I would build, the Earth would simply be an endless plane, and just an ongoing map forever. And just everywhere you go, there would be new and interesting animals to see and environments and all of that. And that's what it wouldn't be different planets. It wouldn't be separated by vast areas of deadly void. Sadly, however, that is not the case. Out of the dozens of worlds, planets, and moons in our solar system, only the Earth shows signs of life, nothing on Mars or Venus. At this point, our best hope of extraterrestrial life is on Jupiter's moon Europa. And that is only if there's an ocean beneath the ice, and only if that ocean is liquid water heated by hydrothermal vents and some channel for oxygenation. Even then, the chances are slim. And remember that the surface temperature of Europa can get down to 50 Kelvin. That's negative 370 degrees Fahrenheit. So even if life existed in the heated and insulated oceans of Europa, and even if it could get oxygen down there, that life would still be trapped in climatic conditions that would eventually lead to extinction. There are other worlds. NASA says that so far they've identified over 5,600 exoplanets, planets outside our solar system, out of the billions that should exist just within our region of the Milky Way galaxy, very few of them are suitable for life either, although there are several that might be, right? But if those few dozen worlds that might have life do have life, it won't be like it is here. They damn sure won't have people on them with green skin or pointed ears. The vast majority of the ones with life would have no more than toxic bacterial sludge in an anaerobic environment where we can't even breathe. Technically, though, that's a planet with life on it, even though it's not our life. And otherwise, they wouldn't be anything like life on Earth. Not even on those few worlds that have the same chemical environments as we have here. The life forms we find would be things we could not even predict. And even if there were, even if it was like it is here, the chemical conditions, the environment, and so forth, those other worlds are so far away that we'd never be able to get there, even with all the technology we can currently muster. And we might have to try, because some of those exoplanets that were discovered are rogue wanderers, not orbiting any sun, but hurtling between systems. Imagine what would happen to our system if another planet found its way into the Goldilocks zone where we are. There's no way to stop a whole other Mars or Venus coming at us. And such a thing wouldn't even have to hit us to destroy us. If it got anywhere near us, it would disrupt everything. And there are a handful of reasons why we might have to leave this world one day. How are we going to do that? Think about it. If you've ever seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, you remember that circular space station that rotates to generate artificial gravity? You're going to need that for interstellar space travel. There's no other way to do it. But let's do better than Stanley Kubrick did. Instead of having a bicycle tire, let's make it a cylinder. Let's say 300 meters wide and at least 1,200 meters long. The bigger, the better. Where the people live in the first 2 or 3 floors on the outside ring. Above that would be hydroponic farms, and the interior, where everything is weightless, can be used for storage of food, fuel, air, constantly purified water, and all that. On the front, you'd need a cone-shaped shield. In the rear, we could use Carl Sagan's suggested nuclear pulse propulsion. That's where a small nuclear explosion happens every half second until you get up to speed, because you'd need that to get such a big ship going fast enough to get anywhere. And consequently, I suspect that our ship would look a bit like the Apollo 11 orbiter, except that it'd be way bigger. Now, even with such a massive ship as that, you still wouldn't be able to have hundreds of people on board like they claim to have in the Starship Enterprise. No, we could only host a few dozen vegan voyagers. And if they're ever going to populate a new world, they'd need to implant frozen embryos in order to avoid an extreme genetic bottleneck. To improve our chances of crossing interstellar space, we would need a minimum of 3 ships traveling together, much like the Pinta, the Nina, and the Santa Maria when they crossed the Atlantic. And now that we have all that worked out, our nearest potentially habitable exoplanet is Proxima Centauri b, 4.2 light years away. Which means that if we could get our gigantic ships going as fast as Voyager 1, imagine an aircraft carrier going at the insane velocity of 38,000 miles per hour or another 10 miles every second. And don't even think about trying to maneuver such a massive ship at that speed, because that ain't going to happen. But even at that ridiculous speed, it would still take us 75,000 years to get there. That means 3,000 generations of people who were born on that ship, who lived their whole lives inside of a tin can and died there, hoping that one day their distant descendants would experience a living world. Imagine how disappointing it would be to finally arrive and find that that new planet cannot be practically terraformed for whatever reason. And now think about those people, those unfortunate colonists of an inhospitable rock. Imagine trying to convince them that the universe is fine-tuned for life.